Hi, my name is Brandon, and over the past year, the Delight Cafe team and I have traveled across the U.S. researching this rapidly growing industry of CBD products. What we have found throughout the industry were products that were inconsistent in dosage and used ingredients that weren't even lab tested. Products with chalky textures, bitter aftertaste, and worst of all, confusion among the CBD consumers. That's why we created Delight Cafe. A 15 milligram lab-tested, all-natural, water-soluble hemp CBD powder pack. It's odorless, colorless, and tasteless. Add it to your favorite drink of choice, wherever, whenever, on the go. Quickly find your calm, your balance, and your delight when you need it most.
Hi, this is Brett Gordon of Businesses Are People Too.
And my name is Brandon Croucher of Delight Cafe.
And this is One Square at a Time, where we take kind of a king's approach on a chessboard of being able to move in life and leadership one square at a time, sometimes forward, sometimes back, sometimes to the side.
Don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe button, guys, and ring that bell.
Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to One Square at a Time, where today we will be actually talking about a movie that many people may have not seen because of being a little bit younger than when the movie came out, which was in 1971. I can see that Mr. Brian Tracy is already here. And he actually is probably twice as old as the movie is old, making him about 100 years old. And that's why he remembers this movie so well. And it's his namesake movie, Brian's Song. Well, Brian's Song was interestingly made only 1 year after the death of Brian Piccolo. Brian Piccolo being the person here in the picture, played by James Caan. He was a football player that ended up being actually on the Chicago Bears. He was drafted by the Chicago Bears, being a part of their I guess, what do you call it? Like their little league. A couple of years before Gayle Sayers even became part of the team. Gayle Sayers was like the number one pick from major college football team back in 1967, I believe it was. And Brian Piccolo was actually there from 1965 after he graduated and was kind of like the number one player in Wake Forest, but Wake Forest was not a number one team. So why am I kind of bringing this up? Because Brian Piccolo in high school was kind of like a star, but then when it came to going to college, he was chosen to be number 2, or it went to a second level tier college because he wasn't good enough to make the top tier college football teams. And he felt that inside that he was number 2. And then he came into the Chicago Bears organization, where he was in kind of their little league to begin with, and had to work his way up to the big leagues, where Gayle Sayers was number 1 and came in. And Brian Piccolo always was trying harder. And that's something that we oftentimes experience in life. We can be very good in one area of our life, and in another area we may not be as good, and we have to try harder, and we have to sometimes take a back seat to somebody who's got a bigger personality, a bigger experience, more talented in what we do. And sometimes we have to accept that role, and other times it means that we got something to aspire to or something to challenge ourselves to. And that's kind of what part of this story was about. It was about a story of two football players, one that was recognized as like the best, and the other who wanted to earn his way to that level of respect. And even though they were competitive for the position, like there was really only at one time like one position that was a halfback and one position that was a fullback, and both of them were playing for that halfback position. But Gayle Sayers, being the number one player, was a shoe-in for that. And from that point on, Brian Piccolo had to basically sit on the sidelines and watch. The thing was, in the practice field and off the field life, Brian Piccolo was a tremendous supporter of Gayle Sayers, and Gayle Sayers was actually a big supporter of Brian Piccolo. Now, the storyline here, though, is about how there's two or three storylines. One is about black and white breaking the color barrier. In 1967, when Brian Piccolo and Gayle Sayers were part of the Chicago Bears starting lineup, it was a time when the team traveled, or when they were in the practice, when they were in preseason, the players roomed together. And it used to be, up until that time actually, the players were segregated. Black players would room with black players, and white players would room with white players. Well, the Chicago Bears had a captain of the team who decided, you know what, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. What we want to do is we want to have the roommates be players that are in the same position. And since the team was kind of broken down to where all the other positions in the team, they could still pair up basically black players with black players and white players with white players. The halfback position was Gayle Sayers and Brian Piccolo. And when they made this decision that they were going to room Piccolo and Sayers together, the captain of the team, the head coach of the team, brought Gayle Sayers into a room and said, "Hey, Gayle, we wanted to tell you about what we're planning on doing, and we wanted to get your opinion," because he was the number one guy. There was no way that they were going to do something that was going to create a problem with Gayle Sayers. And they said, look, and so Gayle comes into this room, and here's, basically the captain and the head coach and the manager, and they're all in the same room. And Gayle's thinking, oh my God, you're going to switch me from being a halfback, which is the position that he wanted, to some other position on the team or something like that. He was ready for the worst thing to come out of this meeting. And they said, okay, Gayle, what we're going to do is we're going to room you with Pick. And Gayle Sayers is like, is that all? Because to him, it was not like this major deal that they were going to be rooming him, a black man, with Brian Piccolo, a white man. And they were like, yeah, this is a big deal. You are going to be part of history, because this has never been done before. And you're going to be called Tom by the black folks, and you're going to be called an uppity black by the white folks. And Gayle was like, hey, we're roommates. We're teammates, we're roommates, and it is the way that we're going to be. And, talking about having that kind of a relationship of kind of, differences and different kind of people. there's people that, you know, have hair, and there's people that don't have hair. And in just a little bit, we're gonna kind of make that happen here on air, and see how that kind of a roommate goes. But anyhow, the two of them broke this race barrier, something that would then, you know, carry on into the future of the NFL and other teams, as you can now mix races as roommates. And that was maybe one of the most significant things that really took a bit of a back seat in this movie, but it was really breaking the race barrier in just that aspect. And then the storyline goes on to where they're playing football, and in the second season, Gayle Sayers has a traumatic injury to his knee, and it could have been a career-ending type of an injury. And Brian Piccolo actually goes over to his house and brings and builds a machine so that Gayle Sayers can actually work out his knee, his leg in his basement, so that he can get back to being the player that he was before the injury. Now, I can see where maybe my co-host might be frozen. So we'll hold off for a second there. Good morning, Jessica, or afternoon, Jessica. Good morning. Damn, I just woke up from a nap, so I'm thinking this is morning. This is afternoon, and looking forward to having this interactive session with you guys. Brandon, I think, lost his internet connection because I see him frozen. Okay, we'll let you guys see what he looks like. Hello, Brandon. Are you there? I don't know what happened to him. Hey, Jaybird, how you doing? No hair means more room for brains. Absolutely. When we have, you know, my hair's falling out. It's not quite as good as Brandon's yet. So my brain is still growing. You know, I may be a couple years older, but that means that I get some opportunity to live up to becoming like Brandon, which is maybe it's not quite like Piccolo trying to be Gayle Sayers. Anyhow, let's get back to the story. So, there he is.
Now you can see me. Can you hear me?
Now I can see you.
Can you hear me?
Just talking about how not having hair means you have more brains, but I said I'm not 100% sure that equates here.
It's actually a factual thing. Whether you know it or not, the bigger the brain and the more you swear, it means you're a lot smarter. So apparently I might be a genius because, fuck, man, I'm always swearing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why his shirt says, like, I'm paranoid because my parents call me an asshole. All right, we're gonna get back. We're gonna get back to the story.
So, what I was listening, I was like, you said I was frozen, and I was cracking up because I'm like, if I'm frozen, I bet I look really dorky. And then I hear you say you brought me in, and I couldn't see anything. So,
well, if you just turn your head and look out the window there, you would look exactly like you were frozen on the screen. There you go. The profile, the man, the myth, the legend, Brandon Croucher.
That's funny. Funny as hell. So I like, thank you for parking, Brandon. That's more brains. I was trying to get the parking spot for so long. But you and I were talking about before the show, and you mentioned it already. I heard you mention how this was Brandon's future is so bright he needs aviators. Yeah, I do. Nice to see you guys. How you doing?
Brandon's head is so shiny. I need sunglasses.
Don't even start with me. You're just jealous.
Exactly. I wish if I lose this little bit of hair that's up here, you'll see the point on my head. The one when they had to grab me with the forceps and actually squeeze the head. I still got a bit of a ridge up there.
I'm not even touching where you're going with these jokes.
That's the truth, though. That's honestly the truth.
I've been shaving my head since I was like 12. So like I know how to shave my head. But like you mentioned earlier, sorry. See, ADD, why are you squirreling? You know how squirrely I am already, and you're gonna come squirrel me? But you mentioned how like it was the scene of him getting his room and the room situation. And I thought that was really a well done scene, and it made me think that's how the whole movie was gonna go. These two guys connecting, almost like a Remember the Titans thing. And it didn't. I mean, and it went fast too. Oh, they made it through one full season, and then they're already in the second season, and then like he's injured, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, how is this gonna get? Because it didn't do any of the race things that the coach said it was gonna do. At least I didn't see it. Like if it did, I missed it because like it was not. It may be little things, but nothing crazy that stood out to me.
Well, I think that there was. The interesting thing about this movie that people may not know is that Brian Piccolo actually was diagnosed with cancer in the latter part of the season in 1969. He underwent surgery in the beginning of the year in 1970, shortly after he got back to Chicago after being on the road. And then he had to undergo a second surgery. Now, you saw part of that in the movie. So he ended up dying in June of 1970. So it was a very quick situation from the time that he actually realized, he was diagnosed with cancer to the time he died. And it was a time when Gayle Sayers was back to his was the comeback player of the year and recognized as the most courageous player of the year, things along those lines. And this movie was made in 1971. So it was a movie that was made within almost a year of when Brian Piccolo died. And it was made for TV. So
I was gonna say, made for TV. I did not know that until you told me that before we went on.
Yeah, so I think what they were really trying to do is bring this story out very quickly after Brian Piccolo's death, to not only pay homage to Brian Piccolo, but to really bring out how this relationship at a time in 1970s where the black and white relationship was still really undergoing this transition of one where separation and integration was becoming more acceptable. And oftentimes it is in sports where you start to see these breakthroughs, whether it be Frank Robinson, or in this case, bringing, black and white together as roommates in a room was really barrier breaking stuff. It was earth shattering almost in a sense. And I think that they were trying to bring out all of this all very quickly at a time that maybe it was needed very much. 1971 was still back in Vietnam. There was still a lot of segregation and stuff that was going on back in Vietnam as well. There was the black troops and the white troops. And I don't know all of the background of why they did it as quickly as they did, but I think that it was also a story that was very apropos to the time. Have you seen
the movie before this?
I had, but I was 9 years old when this movie originally came out. I probably saw it back in the day, and it didn't make. I didn't feel it. Let me put it this way. Okay, I was a child during this time. I was 9 years old. My best friends in grade school were Black, Puerto Rican, and Mexican. So I did not really know about this racial difference. And when I was a Cub Scout, my Cub Scout pack had black and white in it, and we had our meetings in the basement of our house and stuff like that. So I didn't really recognize, at that time, this part of the story, the black and white part of the story, and why it was so significant, because it was just a normal part of my life.
Excuse me. Do you think that really came up fast? I'm sorry. Why do you think? I didn't think that they portrayed the race thing as long as they did, like I said earlier. And for me, that was like, I thought that was going to be the thing of the movie, but then it's cancer. And what hit me was, go ahead.
They did play it out in a number of different ways, though, in the movie. The two guys could actually playfully call each other names, or play that race thing.
Good rebuttal, because they did do that at the one scene, and I remember sitting there going, "Oh my god, I don't think this scene would fly today. I think this scene, if they tried to put that in a movie today, like somebody would be shot, like for real. Like it was not one that I expected." And to know that it was a made-for-TV movie makes that even more intriguing to me.
Yeah, because if you remember when, going back to almost where I left off the story, where Brian Piccolo had built that leg exercise machine in Gayle Sayers' basement, Gayle Sayers is working out, and he's like giving up. He's like, and Piccolo's there trying to push him on, and finally he says, "Hey," he says something about,
"Don't say it,"
the N word. And
I was like listening, and I'm like, "Oh God, something in me just has to yell, no, don't do that."
I was good. I don't think that saying the word is wrong, especially since it was in the movie. But he called him that, and then Gayle Sayers busted up laughing. He's cracking up, and the two of them really were showing at that point. I think it was illustrating. We're friends, we're roommates. You're helping me get back to where I need to be. So when he called him that, it broke the tension of him not finishing the exercise, and at the same time, it brought out, I think, again that whole thing about the race, which in another context on the field with other players would probably have been fighting words. But here, the two of them busted up laughing.
Probably.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we've seen it in the last few years, and then that's why this movie is something that's still relevant today, in a sense. Like, we're still seeing these things, we're still dealing with some of these things, and I think it's like the fact that I could throw the thing out there of two different things: the race card, and how that's still a big fight today, and then you turn around, because you could see a movie being the same today, just a little more modern, and then you have the opposite side of that, the cancer card. Like, it made me like sit there, and now we're in COVID, and you could tell me whatever, but like, how do you go from being, wow, that switched. How do you go from being, here, hold on, I'll do that for you. Better?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. Yeah, that sideways look. There you go.
But like, we're still dealing with the issues of cancer in today's society. And to think about that, like, we've cured AIDS, where people don't have to worry about that as much. If they get it, it's not the death sentence it once was, but we still can't do cancer. Like, it hit me to say, wow, we really, in 50 years, we've grown in technology, but where else have we adapted? I
don't know, but if you really want to think about it, where have we been with Black Lives Matter and everything else in this time? So although you talk about how we've developed, ways to treat other diseases, we have treated cancer in a way, but yet cancer is still with us. And then here we're talking about the races coming together in a room and being one, as opposed to two different. And then yet it's a big deal this year. This is 50 years more than 50 years since when this actually happened, and 50 years since this movie was produced, and we basically are in exactly the same position.
I was just about to say, would you say much has changed?
I think that there's been a lot of changes, but they're not as significant, or there's more subtle changes that have occurred. And I think that all it takes is a spark to potentially rekindle some of this stuff. And the same thing goes, if you really want to push it, okay, you watch how fast the cancer progressed here. Watch how fast COVID spread across the world and what it did. And so there's a lot of actually parallels that I didn't even think about until just now when we're talking about it, that kind of tie into what we've been experiencing over the past year or so. And we need to get back to the fact that we are one race, the human race. And as the human race, we need to protect humanity from diseases, whether it be cancer, whether it be AIDS, whether it be COVID. And we need to come together as one to really be able to conquer, or at least learn to live and thrive with these things that are still going on in the background. And they go on in the background in different people's lives differently. If you've not been affected by cancer, you don't really you're not in touch with so much of that pain that can go along with cancer. If you've not been touched in a different way by race, it may not be as big a deal for you. And looking at Brian Piccolo and Gayle Sayers here, reminds me of when I was in Okinawa and I was a captain, and I came in and I had to get our unit, our operation to work with the base. So I was a tenant unit, we called it. I was the airlift unit on a base that was in Okinawa. That was a fire unit. Well, together we had to get people ready to fly out on planes, and that was on my unit. Was the ones that would airlift people out. Well, I went down to see my counterpart on the base, and it was Lieutenant Taylor. Well, Lieutenant Taylor was a black guy. And I didn't see, that wasn't part of our discussion at any point in time. But we ran into a problem that was even maybe worse than the race thing, and that was his unit didn't see our unit with our unit eye to eye. My unit didn't see his unit. Both of them were like never going to work together because I was an expert here and you don't know what you're talking about and all this bullshit. And we had to actually break down the barrier between our units. We had to physically, Lieutenant Taylor took his guys, I took my guys. We went down to this inspection yard, which is the one that we both had responsibility for. And we said, you guys are going to work together. And they just kind of looked at each other like, no freaking way. You're them and I'm me. And exactly the same thing, but it had nothing to do with race. It had to do with beliefs. And it's really beliefs. Race is nothing but a quick way to identify something that then generates an issue with beliefs. And we have those same types of divisions that come out between male and female. We have those same, these are just very obvious things, but what it's really getting down to is the core. The core is the beliefs. And we can break those things down once we really learn how we can work together. Piccolo and Sayers demonstrated how they can work together. Piccolo, who was not the number one player on the team, he was the backup player to Gayle Sayers. When Gayle Sayers got hurt, Piccolo finally got to be the starter. For the year before, he never started because Gayle Sayers was there. And yet, when Sayers got hurt, the first thing that Piccolo wanted to do was get Sayers back to being who he was. Why? Because Piccolo said there was no way that I want to be looked at as someone who was given a pass. Because you got hurt, now I got to play. He was like, no, you get back to exactly where you were, and then I got to earn my spot. That's how I want to be recognized, as the player that earned his spot. And that is exactly how we need to really look at life. We need to earn our spot, we need to earn our respect, and we need to break down these belief systems that are bullshit, that oftentimes get in the way of our progress or the progress of humanity.
You ended. I feel like I should say preach. Like, good Lord, Brett. All of a sudden, you had some soul in you. But you're right, and I think that the thing is, we need to think about how. So, looking at this and how this movie was portrayed, and we still see many movies made with the same concept today, same premise. How do we? What other things are there that? You and I were talking about the tool earlier, and why this one could be a little bit different. And you came up with a really creative idea. And I wanted to be able to talk a little bit about how running with what you're saying. Because at the end of the movie, he dies and everybody cries. Like, let's be honest, I was more looking for the race thing. And I liked the movie. I enjoyed it. It entertained me. But at the end of the day, I really thought this was going to be something in a different way. And it could just be my age. But you made a comment afterwards about Michael Jackson and
Paul McCartney.
Paul McCartney. Go. Talk about that. Because you hit some really good points in your quick vent.
So the kind of the instrument that I really kind of identified here, and we'll talk about a little bit more of how we fine-tuned it after Brandon and I talked, but I looked at this as kind of the ebony and ivory. I looked at it, ebony and ivory. I looked at it as a piano. I looked at piano keys. You got white keys and black keys, but together is where they play, where they come together with magic and music. And if within the keys just actually activate the hammers that actually vibrate the key, the strings that make the sound. But if it wasn't for the case of the piano around it, you wouldn't get the resonance that you do. And then you've got the pedals on the piano, and all of them together form this beautiful instrument and this beautiful sound. When in the right hands, it's amazing. But even with all of those parts, and this is what Brandon brought up, even with all of those parts, if you don't have the tuning fork and you don't have those strings tightened to where they need to be to give the sound that they're supposed to give, that instrument can still sound like shit. And it's the same on a football team. You can have black players, you can have white players, you can have Mexican players, you can have Hawaiian players. We do have all of those, but it is through practice that they tune. And it is only when they become a fine-tuned instrument that they all really work together. And even when we have them finely tuned on the field as athletes, if they don't break down a lot of those barriers in their belief systems, if not off the field, which ideally is the case, it's got to be on the field or they still will not perform. You've got to have the mission of being a winning football team. You can have the best all-stars on the team and still have shit for a team. In fact, we've seen that where you have some teams that have some of the best players in the world. Actually, the Lakers were one of those for a while. They had some of the best players in the world on the team, and yet they were not performing. The Chicago Bulls had a lot of talent on their team that actually was going at each other because they had big personalities. And the tuning fork that came in was the coach, who actually basically sat them down, put them in their place and said, look, guys, you know, we are going to actually, and he did use this Zen to kind of bring his team into resonance, into harmony, so that when they got out on the court, they were more in tune with each other. Mm-hmm. And it's only then that Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman and Michael Jordan came together to form the core of a team that was unstoppable at the time. But if you took those players and took them apart, there was still tension between them. It had nothing to do with being black or white. They were all black. But Dennis Rodman was Dennis Rodman. And Scottie Pippen was like Brian Piccolo. And Michael Jordan was like Gayle Sayers. But when the three of them came together, they were an unstoppable core. And each had their place and each supported each other on the court, even though sometimes off the court, they definitely didn't see eye to eye.
With that being said, it takes, you've heard the rope analogy where it's not just two, you need the third to make it, where the twine turns into a thicker strand and all that. It really is like that, especially with sports, to race, to all of that. They were the first to be able to do to room together like this in all the NFL. And that, while that's different, and Brian ends up passing away at the end, it's still the fact that the coach in this movie wanted them to know that you are the first two ever to do this. You are the first two that are going to break these barriers. A lot of the things you just mentioned were first times, and it's breaking barriers, being willing to be different. And I think that's what we have to remember through all of this. I think this movie hit home in other ways because you have to be willing to be tuned. Like you're saying, like, and that's me, that's you, that's anybody that wants to make a difference in this world. You have to be willing to hear that I don't have perfect pitch, whatever it is. And you don't want me singing. I'm entertaining with like onesies and whatever, but like Michael Jackson comes out and sings a song about being blacker. Did I miss movie night? Yes, you did. We're almost done with it, Brad. Like, we just finished watching Brian's song, made for TV movie, and it was we're talking about what we're learning right now from it, and Brett's telling me how much of a tool I am. I mean, what the tool we're using.
You know, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I cannot be Brandon. If I try to be Brandon, I'm disingenuous. That's not me. I'm not that kind of a personality. When I saw Brandon work the floor when he was out here at the convention, I'm in awe. I'm not going to try and copy that, because if I do, I'm not going to be comfortable with myself. That's not me. And others will feel that energy. The tuning, even though we may have the same strings, the same keys, we have the black and white together, but we're not tuned the same way.
Correct.
And as a result, the sound that we have needs to be our own sound in order for it to work. And that is what we're really talking about in the grander scheme of things here. And it's the same model that I use for leadership. Yeah.
Sorry. I read Jay Bird.
Absolutely. What a tool that man was.
I read it and laughed. Sorry.
But, we all have our natural genius, our natural energies, and our natural frequencies. And when we're doing things that correspond with those natural frequencies and energies that we have, we're in flow. Life comes together in a way that generates energy for us. So when we do what we're doing, we actually can do it our entire we can do it all day long and come away and feel like we have just started the day. I'm sure out there's been times when you've started doing something and 8 hours later you look at your watch and like, holy cow, the day is gone, and yet I feel great. And it seems like it was only a minute since the day started. Those are the days that we're in flow. That's the days that we're in tune with our energies and doing something that just is in the same wavelength, if you want to call it that, the same frequency as our body, as our mind is in tune. We are congruent internally. And when those things happen, magic happens. That's when you get your creative ideas. That's when you get 10 hours of work done in an hour. Those are the days that we try to create so that we have joy in our life to do other things when we get off of work, when we go home, those types of things. The model that I use when I'm working with leaders is to help each person on the team understand where their natural frequency is, their natural genius is, and then to build the team around having a balanced energy, because there's times where somebody like an Oprah does her thing. That's almost like a Brandon, not exactly, but almost like a Brandon. Very good at bringing, energy and light on the subject that you're talking about. And then you have a Warren Buffett, and Warren Buffett is not my profile, but similar concept. And that is that I'm more laid back, I'm more detail oriented, I'm more behind the scenes. I can talk like I do today, but don't put me in a networking event and expect me to really excel. That burns a lot of my energy. Brandon, on the other hand, flows like a butterfly and stings like a bee as he's going from one place to another and talking to all these different people and basically pollinating them with ideas. And I'm more like the roots in the ground that is gathering all the details, all the nutrients in order to bring them up and then pass them off to somebody like Brandon, who then can take them out and spread them to the world. That's the type of model that I work with in leadership. This is the kind of model that we talk about in sports. When you have team players and team leaders have to bring those players together in a way that the team gels, the team becomes one. When a team becomes one, they don't have to have any number one players in the world, but together their synergy is number one. That's when they win. And that's when you look at these other teams where they've got superstars, but they don't make the cut. Brian's song, even though that was not necessarily the intent of the movie, that's what I got from it. And that's where I see that we need to go with humanity today. We need to get to be the Brian Piccolos and the Gayle Sayers and break down those barriers and recognize that it's together as one race, the human race, that we are going to be able to achieve, overcome, and thrive in today's world. As long as we cannot work together, as long as we don't care about the other because of some bullshit belief system that we may have, we will not thrive. We may survive. It will not be comfortable, and it will be a challenge. So, here are the modern pictures of the movie. You can see the players, and below are the actual players of Gayle Sayers and Brian Piccolo. Now, these guys here are not taking a knee because they're protesting something. They're taking a knee together as cohorts on the football field, watching the game and concentrating on what it is that's happening out there. And at the same time, they're together where their synergies actually are still working. It's kind of like when you talk about the Air Force, when you have a pilot and a co-pilot, they tend to spend most of their on duty and off duty life together. They party together. Their families come together. They basically live together as one, even when they're not flying. Why is that? Because they need to be so finely tuned together that they don't have to think about what the other is going to do or should be doing. That's how they fly, fight, and win. And that was what the Chicago Bears were trying to do by bringing the players and rooming the players together by position so that they could synergize together. They could learn from each other. And then if Gayle Sayers was on the field or Brian Piccolo was on the field, the team would still function the same way because those guys basically were in tune with one another and how that game was going to be played, how they would react, how they would respond. This is how we really can thrive most in life, when we actually come together, when we actually break down those barriers of color, when we break down those barriers of belief systems, when we break down those barriers of culture, of religion, of whatever, and come together as the one race, the human race, the one people. And remember that really there's 99% of what we want is what the others want. But it's that 1% of things where we may differ in our beliefs that gets driven as a wedge between us. And all of a sudden we've got race issues. We've got wars between religions. We've got wars between countries. We've got fighting between neighbors. When if we get down to just one person and one person, we've got much more in common than anything that divides us. All it takes is some effort to get to know the other person. And sometimes what it really takes is to get to live with that other person, because that's when you realize, oh, you want a better life for yourself? Great. That's what I want. You want a better life for your kids? Oh, that's what I want. You want a better life, a better environment for the world so that we pass it on to our grandkids? Great. That's what I want. Wow. We have a lot in common. And all of a sudden that black and white doesn't become black and white. It becomes the gray, or it becomes how we play beautiful music on a piano with the black and white keys, how we tune into each other in order to be able to create the beautiful music that the world really can create, how teams become great teams, how companies become great companies. It's about breaking down the differences and recognizing that there's just a small part, and to recognize that we do have common missions and we do have a common goal of actually trying to create a better life for us and those around us. So that is what we're really talking about when we look at things like this movie. And it was brought out in a way that at the time was really quite, I wouldn't call it revolutionary, but it was quite a difference in terms of really bringing the storyline together at a time when then races were a problem, and yet on the field they showed how it can work together. I think that, I don't know if Brian's still out there. But Brian, what are your thoughts? Have you got, you are one of the keys in bringing this movie to light here, and I wanted to see if you had any additional thoughts that wanted to talk about as well, or anybody that's out there, Britt, Brad, or Jessica. I know that some may not have seen the movie, and others may not have related to the movie in the same way. That's when we can really talk about how things can happen. But ultimately, Brian's Song was a movie that was, I think, brought out to inspire in a way that at the time would not have been inspiring, or a friendship and courage, as it says here, an inspiring true story of friendship and courage. Friendship and the courage to recognize that if I'm hanging out with somebody of a different color at a time when that wasn't acceptable, that was still okay with me. In fact, they're my friends. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go to the restaurant with me and my wife, you and your wife. We're black, we're white. So what? We sit down, we have a conversation and a great time together. Even though those around us may say, well, wait a second. That's not supposed to be. Supposed to be is usually a bullshit belief system about what is supposed to. I always tell that to my mother. She's like, no, you're supposed to eat this way. You're supposed to put the things on the table this way. A party is supposed to be like this. I say supposed to is usually what you believe, but not necessarily what everybody else believes. So when you say supposed to, that is automatically kind of really tying to a belief system, and we need to question that. I see Jessica says, I absolutely think the movie inspires us to be better humans and to come together. And Brian says, the movie exemplifies a spirit of not giving up. That's absolutely true. And Brian says, and the true bond of brotherhood. Yes, brotherhood has absolutely nothing to do with race, creed, color, religion. If you want to call it, and it's got nothing to do with brotherhood or sisterhood. It's peoplehood. It is, again, one humanity, regardless of race, creed, color, sex. We're one people. And when we get over our bullshit about the differences and recognize what it is that brings us together, what it is that, the 98, 99% that is in common that we want to achieve for ourselves, our families, and those around us, that's when that band of brotherhoods, that bond of brotherhood, that bond of sisterhood that really come together. Brian says in the military, we had only one color, green. And in fact, even in the military, we jest somewhat like here where, you're a Marine. I mean, Brian's a Marine, so he gives me shit because I was Air Force. And we give the Navy shit because they're the Navy. And we give the Army shit because they're the Army. But ultimately, we come together. And if it wasn't for us working and being as much in tune with each other as possible, we would not be able to fight together and to help to protect the country. Now, the policies is a whole nother thing. The military, I love the military. I loved being in the Air Force. I did not always like the policies that we as a country chose to employ or deploy our military. So the military is a tool that the government uses to enforce the beliefs of the government, which may not be the beliefs of the people. And that's something else that we need to really look at in today's world, especially. I think it's becoming more and more apparent that the words of the governments, whether it be the U.S. government, the Afghanistan government, the Russians, the Chinese, is not necessarily the way that the general population believe. And I think that we need to really question that. We really need to start looking more closely at that. Being human is being human. Jaybird is saying, no matter how you slice and dice the plate of veggies, it's still veggies. Well, I think Jess would definitely agree with that. And that's absolutely true. We used to talk about, and we've said it even recently, I think more people are saying, again, that we need to be a purple society. We need to be a purple, in fact, U.S. Transcom, I know a lot of people don't know the military, but U.S. Transcom is a transportation or the supply chain core now of all of the military. And that was considered to be the purple suiters. Why? Because in U.S. Transcom, we had the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, all together in the same coordination centers, in the same units, working side by side like these teams so that we can break down the barriers of, no, this is an Army thing, this is a Navy thing, this is an Air Force thing, and say, no, if we really need to get and do what we need to do somewhere else in the world, we need to work together. We need to work efficiently. We need to have all of our resources working in tune as that fine tooth or that tuning fork in order for us to really be able to be one combat unit. And within those units, we still have challenges. Always going to have challenges. I'm not going to say we're going to be in some utopian society. That's never going to happen. We do have belief systems, and we do need to question those. And some of those things are not going to necessarily see 100% eye to eye, but that doesn't mean that we can't coexist. That doesn't mean that we can't work together. What it means is that I appreciate where you're coming from, you appreciate where I'm coming from, and together we look at what it is that ultimate mission is, what the goal is. And yes, we can still have our differences, and it's through those differences and actually that creative tension that we come up with great ideas. So I don't want everything to be utopian and everybody to think the same way. That would suck. The world would be boring as shit if that was the case. So we do need to cherish our differences. We also need to respect the differences so that we can coexist and live together. Jessica is saying honoring and celebrating the differences instead of using them to divide. Absolutely. That is what, that is how we as humanity are going to be able to deal with the world and the situations like COVID. We need to not be one-sided in the way that we look at things. We got to stop the cancel culture when somebody is thinking differently and try to actually bring those things up and bring people together to have a discussion about those and to help to recognize each other's reasons for believing the way that we believe, and not to shut it down, because when you shut it down, it doesn't stop it. It just festers below the surface until it comes up like a giant pimple, and then you end up popping it, and then it's a mess and it can get infected. That's what's happening when a lot of these things around, over the past year and a half, 2 years have really come up. It's been like a giant festering thing that ended up being a giant pimple that burst. I know. You're probably going, God dang, how can you come up with such a crappy analogy? But that is essentially it. Jay Bird is saying, yeah, well, that shit on a shingle is still shit on a shingle, and we will make you, and we'll make you go. Yeah. Chip beef on toast, shit on a shingle. That was especially an old military type thing that they used to serve, especially back even before my time in the military, and that was a while ago. But it is the same thing that happens in life. You know, there's oftentimes that you take a lot of things and you put them in the same pan, you mix them up and you put some spices on it, and it goes from being something that appeared to be absolutely looked like a terrible mix, but when you cook it all together and you allow the flavors to kind of blend, you can end up with something that tastes absolutely phenomenal. And there's other times that it's not going to taste phenomenal, and you say, shit, we don't want to do that one anymore. So we learn from it. Each and every event that happens in our life is an opportunity to learn, and each and every situation in life gives us an opportunity to respond, but yet consider or reconsider some of the belief systems that we had and whether or not those things really work in the situation that we have today. So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been kind of a review of Brian's song. It's really, I think, the coming together of many different things in the world today. Just like you have many different parts of a piano, but the ultimate thing is when the piano's parts, the black keys, the white keys, the strings, the pedals come together and resonate within the body of the piano, and then with that tuning fork, that coach, that leader that finally comes out, that Churchill that England had at the time that England needed it. Those are the things that really bring everything together and take those flavors of life and bring them into something that is absolutely amazing. So thank you all for being here. I hope this has been an opportunity to kind of look at life in a little bit different way, to break down, some of the things that we may have in the back of our minds, and to look at opportunities to where we can help others to do the same. Love you guys. Thank you for being here. I appreciate Brian for helping to really bring out Brian's song as the movie that we reviewed. Jess, I know we've got to get to Pete's Dragon, and maybe that'll be next week, maybe the week after. Got to work that one out, but we'll definitely get to it. And maybe, Jess, if we do that, you can be my co-host on the show. So, and Jay Bird, get back in touch with me so that we can kind of coordinate on what we're going to do. Anyhow, take it easy, guys. Have a great day. Thank you for being here. Love you all. And I will close out the show as soon as I can find the goofy thing that I'm supposed to push here. Anyhow, take it easy, and we'll see you next time.